O'Neill's, another was McDonald's, and then the LM. And it was the Lumberman's Mercantile Company at that time. And it was quite a complex of buildings. There was the main store where Miller's is located now, and the upstairs part of the store. Part of it had ladies ready to wear. They even sold furs and every conceivable item that you would find in a large town department store. Then some of the Simpson offices were also upstairs. The comptroller and vice president had their offices in the upper part of the old LM building. And across the street, across the railroad tracks, as we would term it then, they had one large concrete building where they stored heavy hardware. Because at that time, my father used to go to Columbia Steel in Seattle and buy wire rope for the logging camps and other heavy equipment. Then another building housed cement and bricks and the feed, hay. And then there's an old building south of that housed more feed and cement, because at that time they had kind of a franchise on all of the cement that came into town. And it was quite interesting because they even had rural delivery, big trucks where they took care of all the outlying areas. And the railroads, of course, took LM orders, grocery orders, and whatever else they wished to purchase by phone up to camp. And I remember as a 12-year-old, I started to work and used to help put up orders that went up to camp. Then we had a city delivery as well, because it was quite a business at that time to phone in orders. And I remember how my dad became well known over the country is because he would go to Chicago and New York and buy carloads of merchandise and bring them into Shelton and then have a big promotion. He was quite ahead of the times as far as that type of merchandising.
I came to Shelton, but I was raised out in the country, down near Agate.
Okay. And maybe what you...
When you lived out in the Agate area, when you first came to,
When I was born out there.
Oh, you were born there. Oh, boy. Nice going. And how did you come into town when you needed your groceries? And
Well, my dad built boats, and we would come in that way. And sometimes we would row to town. We lived out across the bay from Skookum Point, and Mother and my brother and I would row into town. And then on special occasions, we'd go to Olympia on Dad's boat. And on Christmas, we always went to Seattle. And that was our one big time at Christmas time.
do you remember the names of some of the boats that your dad built?
That Dad built?
Did he build the Leota by any chance?
No. Dad and my uncle Ellery Libby built a steamboat, and it was called the Sis. They named it for their sister. They always called her Sis. And they went to Alaska in it several times, and we'd go up hunting. And then the boats that I remember, I can't think of them now. Well, anyway, I have pictures of them at home. But we went to Alaska on the last one that he built. And
That must have been a pretty good sized boat then.
yes, it was. Dad and my uncle had Libby's Mill down across from Skookum Point. and they sold the machinery to a company in Alaska. And they loaded all the machinery on a scow, and Dad towed it up with his boat. And then Mother and my brother and I went up on the steamboat ship from Seattle and spent a month in Ketchikan while Dad was getting things established. Well, isn't that enough of my family? What about your family, George?
Well, my grandparents, both sides, the Booth and the Shorter families,
Mm-hmm.
were here prior to the turn of the century. And I don't recall a story behind my grandmother. Her name was Bateman, and her husband had been killed when he'd taken the railroad, the engine across a burning trestle. And she was awarded the home down here on 3rd and 1st, or Cedar and 1st, and it's probably the oldest home still standing in Shelton.
In the same condition, really. It's been well kept.
And well, the home was probably built in the 1880s. I know that in 1892 it was occupied by J.F. Riley, who was cashier at the New Shelton Bank. And so sometime after that, the place was awarded to her as a settlement for her first husband's death. And so sometime probably in the neighborhood of 1895, she married my grandfather, George Shorter. And he worked on the Saul G as a cook. And on the other side of the family, my grandfather, George Booth, and his wife, she died when my father was about 6 years old. And they lived up on 7th Street, right at the foot of Angleside Hill. I don't know much about my father, except that he was one of the early mail men around here. He brought mail from the harbor and delivered it in this area.
It came through the harbor at that time. Came in by boat, I suppose.
I would imagine. And later it came from Olympia. Of course, there was probably mail coming all the time on the Saul G and the other boats that ran between Shelton, Olympia, and Tacoma. So.
Another of the boats that came in was Mr. Munson's Emerald. You remember that?
No, which Munson was that?
It was a brother of Lawrence's father.
No, Lawrence's father had the store downtown.
And he hauled mostly freight. He would take passengers, but he had mostly freight from Olympia and Tacoma.
Speaking of freight, my father-in-law moved down here about 1920, shortly after World War I, and he went into the shipping business, a boat by the name of Leota, and they carried both passengers and oysters and clams, which they delivered to Olympia. And they made it a daily trip, and they would stay at the dock long enough for people to do their shopping in Olympia and come back to Shelton. And some of the people would arrange to come out in their boats to meet the Leota and get aboard that way. And then they anchor the boat out in deeper water, or someone would come with them and take the boat back ashore?
That's the way we always had to meet the Simpson, was come out in a rowboat.